Azure Cosmos DB Liftoff. This session is about planetary scale Postgres for Spring Boot apps, or as I like to call it, a fast and frictionless migration path for developers. My name is Mark Heckler. I'm a principal cloud advocate of Java and JVM languages with Microsoft. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, I can be reached via email at markheckler@microsoft.com, or better yet, on Twitter at mkheck. I check email occasionally. I live on Twitter, so please reach out to me. My DMs are open as well. A bit about me. I am an architect and developer. I'm also obviously an advocate. I've also co-authored and authored some books, and you can check those out. Follow me on Twitter, and you'll find out more. I am a Java champion, Java 1 Rockstar, Kotlin developer expert, and a licensed instrument-rated pilot. But that's enough about me. Everybody needs a hobby, right? And everybody needs to stay busy versus bored. So what's on today's agenda? We're going to be developing a Spring Boot application and connecting it to a local PostgreSQL database. And that's kind of meant to, in a small scale, mimic what is probably going on in a lot of our organizations, in which we have Spring Boot applications talking with and using external PostgreSQL databases on a local level or private cloud or what have you. We're then going to tackle one of the most difficult problems that developers face many times, migration to a much larger, more scalable, more resilient data store in the back end. And we'll be using Azure Database for PostgreSQL, or as I like to call it, Planetary Postgres. We're going to do all this, by the way, in under 15 minutes. What could go wrong? With that, let's code. We're going to start our project using the Spring Initializer, and we're going to use the standard build system of Maven, and we're going to use Java for our language, and the current version of Spring Boot, which is 2.7.4. We're going to change the group because why not? I can. And we're going to just call this our planetary Postgres application. And I'm going to use jar packaging because, after all, it's current day. Why not? And we're going to use Java 17 because it's the current LTS version of Java, but you have options once again. I'm going to bring in a few basic dependencies here so that we can create a web-based application. I'm going to be using JPA, the Java Persistence API, to access our database backend, and we'll use the Postgres driver to access Postgres, obviously behind the scenes. And then I'm going to bring in Lombok because I'm a lazy developer, but lazy in the good ways, right? Lazy when it counts, not in the bad ways. And we're going to further reduce our boilerplate code so that we can focus on the important things today and not just the extra stuff that we might have to deal with a lot of boilerplate. We don't want that. And I'm going to generate our project here, and we will save that. I'll just save that to my desktop, and we'll open it from there. And I find the zip file that we've downloaded with the project. We'll open that. And for today's coding, I'm going to be using IntelliJ. Now notice that, yes, I work at Microsoft, and I'm using IntelliJ on a Mac to develop Java code. And that's because Microsoft wants to be the ultimate destination, the best destination for your applications, your data, anywhere in the world, in the cloud. So whatever your toolchain choice, whatever your platform choice, whatever your language choice, it's all there. We're happy to help you have the best possible outcomes you can have. So with that, I'm going to launch in and just take a quick look at my build file, my pom.xml. And we see that we're using Java 17. We're using the current version of Boot 2.7.4. And we see our dependencies here that we included in our project. I'm also going to open up my application.properties, which allows me to provide some suitable defaults for a few values that we'll need in our application. So I'm going to define here our data source URL, and I'm once again going to be using JDBC and Postgres SQL. And I'm going to first access a local database, as I mentioned, and I'm going to be pointing that to a database I have up and running currently on localhost called Postgres. Clever, right? And I'm going to specify the username. And in this case, the username is just Postgres. And then I'm going to also specify the password. Please don't tell anyone, but I guess we all know that everything runs on caffeine anyway. So I guess it's not a big secret. And then I'm going to define one more thing, which is the DDL auto parameter for JPA Hibernate. And I'm going to set that to create drop. Now, this is a wonderful parameter to set for development, great for devs, for dev, not for prod, because obviously we don't want to create our table structures and when our application starts, and we don't want to delete them when our application ends in production. But for development, this helps focus on that developer first experience and get us up and running quickly and efficiently so that we can concentrate on the business at hand, which is to develop our application. Again, I'm going to keep this pretty simple based on our short time we have here together today, but I'm going to define a data class here for us to store the important things and retrieve them. So I'm going to set this as an entity. I'm going to define this as an entity, and I'm going to use Lombok to make this a data class. I'm going to also have Lombok provide a noargs constructor for me because JPA requires a noargs constructor in order to function properly. And I'm going to ask that Lombok provides us a required args constructor. Now, Lombok is a bytecode generator, so that allows us to keep everything nice and tight and clean for the demo. Some folks use it in production, some don't. But we're going to use it here today because that way I can focus on the key bits and not get bogged down once again in the boilerplate. And I couldn't think of anything else to save, so I'm just going to save some marks. You know, every demo needs some target. That's us. And I'm going to define our ID field here and ask that Postgres generates the value for that. And I'm going to make this a long value and just call this cleverly enough ID. I'm going to specify the next couple of fields should be non-null. And non-null combined with this required args constructor annotation for Lombok means that Lombok will create a constructor with a parameter for each of the member variables indicated to have required values. In this case, we have first name and last name. So Lombok will create a constructor with just these two parameters. So I think that does everything that we needed to do for now. I'm also going to define an interface, a Mark repository interface, and we're going to extend the defined CRUD repository interface that's in Spring Data. So we can store objects of type Mark with IDs of type long. And this is enough for Spring Boot's autoconfig to see this interface, extending a Spring Data interface, and create a proxy bean to allow us to interact with our table, with our database, in this case, a Postgres database, and store and retrieve marks using a set of CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete. And that's sufficient to get us up and running. I'm going to now create a bean so we can load some data into this and retrieve it and see that it's actually working. Just going to use a command line runner bean, and we'll say load mark data here, and we will load some marks. And I'm going to inject our mark repository here so that we can use that once again to access our database behind the scenes. Command line runner is a functional interface with a single abstract method, and as such, since Java 8, we've been able to just specify that as a lambda, which we're doing now. I'm going to use our repo that we're injecting, and I'm just, as a matter of good habit, deleting all values in case I've left anything in there before. And once again, this actually shouldn't be required, this delete all, because if we're doing a create drop, we shouldn't need it. But again, this is a good practice and habit to get into, so I'm going to continue with the habit. I'm then going to specify some marks to save to our data store, and I'll just do this again rather quickly. And I'm going to save maybe 2 or 3 of these. Let's go with 3. Why not? And we'll save these, and I'm actually going to bring those in as a list of. And of course, let's see, I'll go ahead and redo this. Some new marks. And there we go. So let's start off with Mark Brown. Mark Brown leads the charge with the Azure Database for Postgres and Cosmos DB engine development back here at Microsoft. So Mark's kind of a celebrity in my eyes. He's also the host of Cosmos DB Learn TV. You've probably seen him. You've probably heard of him. And then I'll throw me in because, well, I'm here. Why not? And then I'm also going to bring in another Mark. Probably nobody's heard of this one, Mark Hamill. He's just kind of an up-and-coming actor nowadays, I hear. And then I'm going to just do a repo find all for each, and we'll just print this out to make sure we have working what we think we have working. It's always good to test, trust but verify. And I'm going to restart this or start this application, and we'll see what we get. So what should happen is we should open up a connection to Postgres, and we should save these marks, and then we should retrieve them and print them out. And of course, it works because things always go perfectly in live demos, right? Well, that aside, the next thing I'm going to do, because up to this point, this is just meant to simulate your normal Spring Boot development cycles. So you're using a local database, you're developing your application, you're iterating quickly, and you're getting things ready to go to production, but they're not there yet. So the next thing I'm going to do is tackle one of the hardest things about development work, which is migrations. Now, I do want to, just so we can prove what's going on here, do a couple of changes. Now, how do you get this to use a planetary scale Postgres? So I'm going to copy this, and instead of the data source we have here, I need to point to a planetary scale Postgres installation. The easy way to do that, since I already have things kind of set up, just in the interest of time, I've created an Azure Database for PostgreSQL single server instance, and then I can go here to see my connection strings. And here we see the connection string for JDBC. Let me zoom in on that just a bit. And we see that we can grab that connection string and plug that in and use that. So I'm going to copy that to clipboard and go back to my IDE and just paste that in. Now you can see that there are some variables here that we need to provide values for, the database and of course the password. We're requiring SSL, so on and so forth. But we have all the basic pieces in place that we need. Now, I do want to do one more thing first, just in the interest of proving that we're doing what we say we're doing. I'm just going to get me out of here. I'm certainly not essential to this demo data. I'm here after all. And I'm going to add in another famous mark. Well, we have Mark Brown, Mark Gaddis, and Mark Hamill now. Three famous Marks. Mark Gaddis was a showrunner and contributor to BBC's Doctor Who and Sherlock. Don't know if you've heard of him, but probably so. And I'm going to, and that, by the way, I do that just so we can verify that things have switched, that we are going to be using Azure Database for Postgres. And I have an environment variable set behind the scenes, so you can't see my password. But what I'm going to do now is just go in and build our application here at the command line, and then I'll run it from the command line, and we'll see that everything, hopefully, will be connected to a much more scalable, resilient, robust version of Postgres running in Azure. So we got a hint of that right up there in the build. I'm going to go ahead and do a java-jar target, and we'll just run it from here and see what we get. And then, of course, everything works because, again, things never fail in live demos. We see that we have Mark Brown, Mark Gaddis, and Mark Hamill, and I don't think you can get any better than that. So with that, owing to our short time we have here together, I'm going to go back and finish up and share some resources that you might find handy. For starters, the repos. If you want to see what kind of scripts are necessary, which they're very small, very lean, but they are scripts that I use to create an instance of the Azure database for Postgres in Azure. And of course, I use the Azure command line interface, which I'll get to in a moment, but the scripts repo is there, as well as the demo repo for the Spring Boot application. You can kind of examine the dependencies and what I used, and maybe wonder why I didn't use something. By all means, that's where the bottom part comes in. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please reach me at my email or better yet on Twitter. The middle section is kind of the key, I feel like, because if you want to know more about Cosmos DB, aka.ms/CosmosDB. If you want to know more about the Azure command line interface that I use for my scripting, it's there. You certainly have options. As you saw, you can go through the portal and go through and use the portal to create your Azure instances. You also can use other tools as well. I just am fond of scripting and the AZ CLI. With that, we're done. So good luck and go forth and Postgres.